I'm going to be talking with Lucas Davis, who is a professor of economics at the Haas Energy Institute at the University of Berkeley in California, about the power crisis, the potential for blackouts that California will be experiencing this weekend. Once again, I'm afraid. So welcome to the interview, Lucas.
Thank you.
Well, look, you're down at Berkeley. Give us an overview of what California is looking at this weekend and why.
Sure. So here in the Bay Area, it's pretty mild temperatures, but in Southern California, it's hot. And in much of the West, it's hot. It's 96 degrees in LA today, 106 in Palm Springs, and 122 in Death Valley.
Wow. Death Valley comes by its name, honestly. Well, look, the last time that California had blackouts, it didn't have enough power, but it trades with its Western partners, its northern states, and a couple of Canadian provinces, BC and Alberta, and then Western states. The problem last time was that everybody was hot at the same time, and there wasn't enough power to import into California. Are we looking at that kind of a situation again?
Absolutely. California imports about 25% of its electricity. So it depends what's going on in the entire Western US, and as you mentioned, Western Canada. And right now it's hot all over the West. We're also in an incredible drought year, and that matters a lot because in the western part of North America, we get a lot of electricity from hydroelectricity. So drought is a big part of the story, not only in California, but across the West.
Yeah, I've been seeing photos of the various reservoirs, for instance, the Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, and they're down. And it's just startling how low they are. And I assume that the big reservoirs that you see out in the Grapevine and places like that in California, same situation?
Yeah, we actually don't get that much electricity from Hoover Dam. We tend to get more from these large run-of-the-river facilities, places like Grand Coulee Dam. But the fact of the matter is that hydro is way down, and so that's difficult. Actually, hydro is probably the biggest factor that swings year to year in terms of electricity supply, and we're in a real down year, so that makes everything tighter.
Now, one of the big changes from last year was the amount of battery storage that's been added to the California grid, and we all know the story about excess solar in California and having to curtail it at times. And prior to this drought and the potential shortages, what I've been reading in the trade press is that the battery storage actually looked like it had been doing a pretty good job. And is it just being overwhelmed?
I think it's being operated correctly. I think we've spent billions of dollars on storage, but even after all that, we still have relatively little storage. I think the challenge is that electricity is really expensive to store, and so it's worth doing some of that. And we are, but it still is not enough storage to allow us to compensate for these large year to year and month to month variability. It's just not enough storage.
Okay, so we might have some more storage capacity in the future. Not enough today. Mm-hmm. The other thing we haven't talked about is wildfires, because that played a big role last year. What role is it playing this year?
I haven't heard wildfires discussed in terms of this weekend's issues. Sometimes that reduces the transmission line, the capacity of transmission lines throughout the states, but I haven't heard about that in relation to this weekend.
And another issue that was being discussed last year is Diablo Canyon, California's last nuclear plant. That is now staying online for a little while longer. And what role is Diablo Canyon playing in this discussion?
I mean, I'm sure glad that it's up and running this weekend because it's producing a lot of megawatt hours for us. What's happening not only in the U.S. but in the EU. There's a lot of thinking about these nuclear retirement decisions. We had gone pretty far down the direction of saying, well, let's go ahead and close a lot of our existing nuclear. But this crisis really makes us rethink that. The continuing drought is one of the issues. The high natural gas prices is another thing that's making us think, well, maybe Diablo Canyon wasn't so bad, and there's going to be a lot of hard decisions that have to be made over the next couple of years.
I interviewed you, I think it was last year, about a blog post you wrote about the percentage of American households that had air conditioning. and the amount that got both air and heat from electricity, it's much higher. I think it was 39%, if I remember correctly. And I'm wondering, is there an opportunity, and I should just back up. I assume that most of those air conditioners were not efficient heat pumps. They were older style technologies. Is there an opportunity here to, as those need to be replaced, to replace them with much more efficient technology?
There have been advances in air conditioning energy efficiency, and so there is potential for more efficient air conditioners. The whole heat pump decision is really more about heating, more about the heating side of it. In terms of cooling, there's always advantage. There's always opportunities for more efficient cooling. It's not only just the air conditioner, right? Right. How much electricity used for air conditioning depends on the entire building shell. And one of the things that a lot of policy has been aimed at here in California is thinking about the entire installation, the entire house concept, and how we can reduce electricity across the board. There's a lot of opportunity there. I should say it's not cheap, right? It's expensive when you go start replacing air conditioners. It's expensive when you start redoing duct system in houses. So it's not incredibly low hanging fruit, but yeah, there are opportunities there.
Now, last year, there was also a lot of talk about demand response. So having utilities be able to turn people's air conditioners down, their appliances down, that sort of thing. Has there been any progress on that front?
Absolutely. There's a lot of demand response. I belong to Ohm Connect. And so Ohm Connect, the way Ohm Connect does it is they don't have their hand on my thermostat. There's no active changing of any energy consumption in my house. But what does happen is I get texts. So Ohm Connect sends me a text that says, actually, I got one for today that's during certain hours, they encourage me to reduce my consumption. And if I do, I get compensated through a system. I get paid for my reductions. And there's hundreds of thousands of Californian households that have signed up for demand response programs like that.
Okay. What about other measures that may have been taken up? Maybe actually, what I'm thinking of here is electric vehicles. California leads the country in electric vehicle adoption. Obviously, if you're charging up at home, wherever you're charging, you're taking more electricity from the grid. Is that playing a role here in the load that is causing problems?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at this exact moment that the grid is stressed, there's hundreds of thousands of electric vehicles that are plugged in. Many of those vehicles don't need to be charged right at the moment. And so one of the real opportunities here, one of the real, frankly, policy requirements we have moving forward is to think hard about when electric vehicles do their charging. I think a lot of owners wouldn't mind charging their vehicles later at night. Do you really need the vehicle to be fully charged right now? Maybe we could charge your vehicle between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. But right now the incentives aren't necessarily there. A lot of the rates that households face don't reflect those dynamics. So this is something we really, particularly as the number of EVs increases, we've got to do a better job of encouraging people to charge at the right time.
Now, I interviewed your colleague Severin Bornstein not too long ago about solar, and he's been on about rooftop solar for a long time. There's maybe too much of it. And I'm wondering if he were part of this interview now, would he maybe rethink his position and say, you know what, all that extra rooftop solar is maybe coming in a bit handy today?
So today in California, we're actually going to hit the peak at 5 p.m. Now that's not the peak in terms of total demand. The total demand is actually going to peak earlier than that. But 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 7 p.m. is when the solar generation begins to come down. And it's actually those evening hours that are emerging as the really the biggest challenge for the California grid. So more solar is not actually that helpful for those evening hours. Instead, what we really need is incentives for flexible supply. You mentioned demand response, storage, anything else that can help fill in those. Well, this is the famous ramp, the duck curve. How do you meet that massive increase in net demand as the sun sets? So no, I think there's a lot of excitement about solar. and that's with good reason, but solar's not going to solve all the problems on hot days like this.
So if I had to sum this up, Lucas, we're looking at California, which has a population bigger than Canada. It's the world's fifth largest economy, all on its own. And it's because of the policies around decarbonization and adoption of renewables and adoption of clean energy technologies like electric vehicle. This is a really complex problem. It's almost a wicked problem.
And that's why it's important that whatever we do in California, we need to study it. We need to figure out what's working, what's not working, because a lot of other places are going to go the way of California. I was speaking to a bunch of Norwegians last week. We should be looking at we should be looking at best practices from around the world. Norway, for example, is way out ahead of us in terms of EV adoption. We should be learning everything we possibly can about Norway, because you're not going to solve climate change with California and Norway, right? This all hinges on technology and learning diffusing to the rest of the world. We have to make it easy to decarbonize. If we show the rest of the world the way, that's going to have a lot bigger impact than whatever we do within our own state border.
Right. And it sounds like this is not a technology problem anymore. The technology is there. It's a question of policy. It's a question of pricing. It's a question of market function. There's a lot of other issues, but the question of generating, enough electricity at a reasonable price, it sounds like that issue has been solved.
Cheap renewables are real, right? We're grid scale solar, grid scale wind are now as cheap on a levelized cost basis as natural gas. So I agree with you. I'm an economist, so I see markets everywhere. And here I think the solution is more markets, not less markets. It's getting prices right. It's pricing carbon to the extent you can. Thank you. Go Canada, right? Pricing carbon. That's going to lead the entire market to a more efficient outcome.
So if you were, as an economist, I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out here. So let's assume, and we really hope that California, limps through this weekend and does okay, and we don't have any big blackouts or any problems. So let's assume that that's the case. We're heading into cooler weather. So maybe, this will be the last time, we hope. But this problem is going to arise again in next year and the year after and the year after. So has enough progress been made in California, and what needs to be done between now and summer of 2023 to maybe get a better handle on this?
I actually think I'm with you. I hope we get through this weekend, and moving forward, I just think it's more of everything. We need more transmission. We need more storage. In some cases, we need more generation. We need more demand response. The solution is not one thing. It's doing everything.
Well, Lucas, always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you very much for your insights.
Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.